I don't imagine there are very many here that served in the Second World War. Anybody? One? Anyway, as she mentioned, Camp X, which of course is closed down now near Whitby in Oshawa, and it was in the paper, and you mentioned Camp X, and that's where, of course, Stevenson started or suggested to Churchill to start what is called SOE, Special Operators Executive, and that's what I would belong to. And we started our training in Camp X, and from Camp X we went on to training in England, parachuting, and all the other trainings that commandos did in those days. And of course, in my case, I went overseas and I jumped behind enemy lines twice, besides my regular jumps, and eventually I ended up writing a book about my wartime experiences. And afterwards, if anyone wants to ask me any questions, you're quite welcome to do so, as long as I can hear you with my, as you can tell, I'm a youngster now. And at any rate, what happened, very briefly, I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about my wartime experiences, but it all started, as I told you, at Camp X, and then over in England and Scotland, and eventually I jumped into Yugoslavia, and we're there, and at that time the British had a camp there under Tito, and I tried to get into, I speak Hungarian, and we were going to drop me into Hungary, but I couldn't get in there from Yugoslavia, so we went back to Italy and we flew into Hungary, a blind drop into Hungary, and I was captured there, and the book outlines all the things that happened to me during the war. And of course I was captured and I was beat up by both the Germans and the Hungarians, even though I speak the language, but nobody knows that I spoke the language. So I was at a big disadvantage because I could hear everything in two languages, and of course I could understand and had a chance to think about any answer I would have to give. At any rate, being beat up by both things, and I was a prisoner of war for not very long, because eventually I escaped, and then eventually I got Hungary. I was in Budapest, and Hungary was run over by the Russians, and I was a prisoner of the Russians for a while as well. And then, of course, eventually I got back to the British camp in southern Hungary, and flown back into Italy, and eventually back to England, eventually back to Canada. At any rate, during the war, they changed my name to Gordon. So my wartime name was Gordon, Joseph Gordon. The main reason for that was because they wanted the similar name. In other words, the same initials. My name is Joseph J. Galady. And of course, Gordon, I didn't have to memorize too much because there was very similar names. So I went into that name for all the time during the Second World War. And I don't know how much interest there is between everybody here, but if anyone is interested in it, I have a few books that you can buy. They're $10 each, what I have left, and Now, I don't know if there, anybody wants to ask me any questions at the present time, I'll be glad to try and answer them.
Yes, I do. Where was Camp X?
Camp X was outside of Whitby, Oshawa,
Oh,
right here in Canada.
yes, I realized it was in Canada, but I thought.
Well, I think she read something about the lady that, was it, Helen, I think it's Helen Davidson, she was there as a code operator during the war. And there was an article in the Star about her on I believe it was last Saturday or last week sometime during, and she's still alive, and I think she's 86, but she was no way connected with the SOE, the training to jump behind enemy lines. She was there as a code operator, and I think she said that she sent the codes on. She didn't know what they meant or anything, but they were all coded, and that's what she did, and she still is alive. Now, I don't know how many people, I don't know if anybody else that's alive that's served at Camp X. So there may be a few because there were different nationalities, and people were trained to go into different countries in Europe. Now, the group that I was with, there's around 10 of us, and there's pictures of the whole group in the book here. I believe I'm the only survivor still alive. All the rest, unfortunately, are gone. But,
Can I ask, how did they select you?
I'm sorry, miss, I have a little bit of hearing problem, so you're gonna have to almost yell.
How do they choose you? What do you have to go through to be picked for that job? I mean, do they have to go way into your background and,
Well, that's an interesting question. As you know, the war broke out, and you were at a certain age, you were conscripted in Canada, but you could join up ahead of time. I joined up ahead of time, and I was first in signals. Then I wanted to get into paratroops, so they transferred me to Petawawa. And at Petawawa, someone discovered that I spoke a foreign language. And that's how I got into Camp X. Because if they wanted people that could jump behind enemy lines who could speak a language that you were going to jump into without a trace of an accent. And I have the ability to speak, still do, to speak Hungarian fluently. In fact, I presume I picked it up more. Well, a little bit of background. My family came to Canada in the 30s from Hungary. And I was 8 years old when I came to Canada. And of course, I had to learn the language and everything else at the same time. It was quite a change to switch from one language to the other. And of course, the only time I spoke Hungarian was at home. Otherwise, I never spoke with anyone other, even if they were Hungarian. None of us ever spoke Hungarian. We'd all speak English, naturally. And that's how it was. Does that answer your question?
You spoke about jumping behind enemy lines often. What was it like to make that jump, and how were you trained so you wouldn't injure yourself? It must have been quite a jump.
Well, it's very difficult. The type of work we were in, SOE, jumping behind enemy lines, we were trained. The training was very difficult, I wouldn't say difficult, but very intensive. First, we were trained in Canada just for the basics at Camp X. And then you went to England, and we were trained in, another training took another 3 months from Scotland all the way down to all through England, and I was trained in wireless, so I was able to, I'm an operator trained in wireless at Beaulieu, which is outside of London, England. And that's where all the German codes were broken at that particular camp.
You jump with a parachute? Oh, no.
Parachute, well, it's kind of involved. To go into this service, you have to have all the trainings of a commando, the trainings of a paratrooper, and the training of killing people, and all the different trainings that went into jumping behind enemy lines and being able to survive. Now all that took place a couple of months here in Canada, and then in England another 3 months, then in Africa some more training, and eventually ended up in Italy. And from Italy is where our headquarters were for jumping into enemy lines. And my first jump was into Yugoslavia. There was a British officer camped there, and the gentleman, he was a captain at that time. He's still alive, and he lives in northern Scotland right now. I was in touch with him about 3 months ago, and he is still alive, and he now, of all things, fixes clocks.
That's it.
Joe, if I'm not mistaken, the CIA took over the course of studies at Camp X, and Bin Laden was a graduate of CIA, so Bin Laden, in a sense, is a classmate of yours, am I correct? Because Bin Laden took the CIA course. He was a freedom fighter before, the U.S. considered him a freedom fighter before.
Well, actually, Camp X was a very basic training considering all the other trainings that I had to go through. Camp X was barely the beginning of training. Mind you, I was only 20 years old. And there's not many here that are only 20, I don't imagine. Hooray!
How many would be dropped off? How many would be dropped at the same time behind enemy lines? How many would be in your group?
Well, the group I was with, there's a picture of the group that we trained with at Camp X. And of the group, somewhere in here is a picture, I know there's one here somewhere. Individually, I jumped into Yugoslavia.
You? Just one person?
When I jumped into Yugoslavia, I was by myself.
Oh.
And there was a British camp there. Tito allowed this camp to be there because Tito was very much a communist. And he didn't believe, as near as I could tell, he did not believe that Russia should be taking over Yugoslavia. But he himself was a communist and wanted and controlled everything. Everything that went on in Yugoslavia at that time was controlled by Tito. And I jumped into Yugoslavia the first time, and by myself, and I jumped there, and I was met there, and we started to do. Everything was jumping into Hungary was organized and had to be done a certain way. And my particular group was under Captain John Coates, who was in the British Army. And during the war, I switched from the Canadian Army to the British Army, and then after the war, back to the Canadian Army.
jumped into Yugoslavia, they came to meet you. What was your job once you had landed there? What were you to do? Were you to train people? Were you to
Well, I
spy, or what were you
When I
doing?
jumped into Yugoslavia, as I mentioned, there's a British captain there, had a small camp there. And from there, along with a couple of the others that were in the group, we were to go into Hungary by land and cross the Drava River and get into Hungary.
Were you spying on them, or were you actively involved in trying to take over the land? What were you doing? Was it espionage?
What was the mission?
Espionage, yes.
Yeah, okay.
That's what it was all about. We're trained to go behind enemy lines and disrupt the Germans who had, in the meantime, well, I was there when the Germans took over Hungary. I was in Budapest during the German occupation of Hungary and the occupation of Hungary, and also how Hungary tried to get out of it, and that's why Hitler took over Hungary completely. So when I was captured, I was a capture of the Hungarians, who were part of by this time, the ones that took over and were in sympathy with Hitler, and also the Germans, because the German soldiers were there. And I was there in Hungary, and I was only captured, it's all in my book, but it was only captured for a very short time, and then I escaped. And I escaped, and I was in Hungary while the Germans were there. I was in Budapest when the Germans defended it and tried to stop the Russians from crossing the Danube River. And eventually they did, and I was there when the Russians took over Hungary, and it took over Budapest, where I was, and I spent all during when I escaped, I spent a great deal of time and went through many inspections while the Germans were they were just looking and looked through everything. I must have had a half a dozen. I was staying with a lady called Carola, who had, it was a safe house, and I stayed with her along with Captain John Coates. And he was, we decided to separate. So he separated and went to the southern part of Budapest. And I stayed in the center of Budapest. And I went through many inspections by the Germans. I saw people shot on the Danube River. And they were just shot, Jews, mostly. But according to history, Hitler killed just as many non-Jews as he did kill Jews. But anyway, during the war, they were shooting Jews down on the banks and then threw them over into the river. So that's all this during my young years in the... Anyway.
How do you spy? What do you have to do to spy? Do you have to listen to people? How do you go about spying?
Well, spying is, if you read the paper a few days ago, the Canadians right now have what they call spying on where the Canadian soldiers are now occupied. They also have spies, and they are, if you read the paper, it tells you exactly what their condition was. The spy was to get information, getting it back to headquarters so that they could act and may affect the cause of the war.
Did the safe house have radio equipment in it that you could send out messages? Or how did you get, when you had spied and found some messages, how did you get the messages back to the sources?
maybe you missed the point. I was
Yeah, probably
captured,
did. Yeah.
and when I was captured, I'm a radio operator. Not now anymore, but I was. All the equipment was hidden. They eventually found the equipment which I had dug underground before capture. And what happened was, then they tried to get me to send messages that they wanted me to send, because what I said, the crystals were not proper, and I made sure that they weren't proper, and I couldn't send them back. So I got beat up for that, but so the only thing you could do by this time, you see, they had all the equipment. My equipment was there, and the equipment made maybe 20 pounds, the best equipment that was available at that time. And if I hadn't been captured and I was set up, then I would have been able to send messages back to headquarters. But because I was, we had a blind jump. In other words, we jumped blind. We didn't know anyone there, except we had safe houses.
Okay.
When you jumped, what, besides the parachute, what did you have
If
with
I
you?
could hear you, I'd be able to answer your question.
Yell, Fred.
Besides the parachute when you were jumping, you must have had equipment. Did you have maps? Did you bring take the radio with you as you were jumping, or was that set aside?
Well, when we were at the blind jump, I jumped with, as I mentioned, Captain Coates. Now, John spoke 5 languages. He could talk to you in German, talk to you in Italian, talk to you in French, Spanish. Now, he was a linguist. And he's, as I mentioned, he was the captain and I was with him. And I was a lieutenant during the war in the British Army. Does that answer your question?
Well,
Franz, come up, so speak at the mic,
I
or
know
come up.
I just wanted to know what kind of equipment did you take with you?
Other
Did you
than
have
radios.
maps? Did you have the radios? Did you have to bring that?
Well,
Or was that?
in my case, I took radio equipment and money,
Oh, yeah.
foreign money. Money that was hidden in our suits, which of course they never even found.
Oh,
And the street maps and stuff?
No, I just had radio equipment. That was my job.
yeah.
So I had radio equipment.
But how did you know where you were? Where you wanted to
I
go?
just told you, we blind jumped into Hungary, blind.
Doesn't know where he is.
In other words, we did not have any contacts at that place. We had contacts elsewhere. We jumped here, knowing nobody. I had my equipment, and John he was in charge, he was the captain of the mission. He was there too. He was captured before I was. You know.
Ask questions.
What led to your capture? And
Pardon?
could you give us some details on your capture, how you got captured, and then how you escaped?
Sorry, I'm not even sure what your question is. Come on up a little closer so I can hear you better. I have a little problem with hearing. Oh,
When you first got captured, what led to that? Did somebody turn you in, or did you be in the wrong place at the wrong time? So just tell us a bit about your capture. And then after you were imprisoned, you said you escaped. So could you give us some details on your escape, how you got away?
you want me to repeat the whole book for you?
Just the Coles Notes version.
Well, basically, we jumped blind. And they, of course, knew we jumped because of the equipment they had. They knew we had jumped. So now they came looking for us. I happened to hide all my equipment and I was up a tree, and they came with a great bunch of, I would say, old soldiers. They came looking for us. So, and they had half a dozen dogs with them. So I happened to be up a tree, and of course eventually they found me there, and I came down, and they had pitchforks, they had guns and everything, and of course they spoke Hungarian. Of course I understood every word, but they didn't know that I could speak. And of course, that's how I was captured. And John, he was also captured a little later. And eventually, we were put together in a similar prison, but never together. And John, I taught John how to speak Hungarian. Now, he spoke Hungarian, not bad, for a person that just learned it. But he spoke 5 other languages fluently.
How did you escape from the prison?
Well, you're getting into more detail.
Yeah, that's what we want.
Well, I went to first I went from one camp to another. Eventually ended up in Budapest, in a prisoner camp. And at that camp we had some people that were helping us. There were some Polish soldiers there that we got very close to. And they were going to ship us, the Germans were to ship us to Vienna, and we were going to leave a week from then. And that's when I escaped along with John. We escaped, jumped over some fences, and eventually we took the streetcar, because I spoke the language, and we took a streetcar into Budapest. We were on the outskirts of a place called Zugliget, which doesn't mean anything to you. But we took a streetcar, and I bought streetcar tickets, and we're right into the center of Budapest, to a safe house. The first safe house we went to happened to be the headquarters of some German generals, which we discovered after we got to their backyard, but they never saw us. And then we went to the second safe house, which again, we walked part of the way and took a streetcar. And we went there, and this lady, Carla, she was a safe house that was organized, I presume, by the British Army, and that's where I spent the time, and that's where we separated the two. I stayed in Budapest, he went to the outskirts of Budapest. So I was there during all this safe house I was in was taken over by the Germans, and it became their wireless headquarters. And I was there at the same time, and the only thing we had left was the front living room. And during that time we had searches regularly. I went through, I don't know, half a dozen searches, and they never discovered me, and I can't figure out why they never saw me. Does that answer half your question?
Yep.
When you were in Hungary, did you meet up with any of your family that had been left behind when you came to Canada?
No.
No.
My mission had nothing to do with the family.
No, I know that. I thought maybe, you might have had a chance
I
to
went
meet.
back, I have relatives in Hungary. I've been back to Hungary, to the small town that I was born in, but that was not part of what I could do at that time.
Okay.
Eventually, after I escaped and got into the safe house, and after that safe house, the Germans were there, and the Russians were coming in, and they overran Budapest. I was there all that time with bombs flying everywhere. But I was fortunate, I was never hit by anything.
When you dropped into enemy territory, did you find that your training was adequate?
Well, That's a very difficult question. The training we had was certainly more than adequate, but you can never, no one can ever teach you what you're going to run into where someplace that you've never been before. The training was certainly excellent, because the training we had in, not so much in Canada, Campex was very minor training compared to the training we had in England and Scotland. But the training was certainly more than adequate. We were taught how to kill people, you were taught how to do everything. And I could probably still do some of that if I had to, and if we're forced to do it.
So you, in spite of the odds, you felt fairly comfortable, confident when you were in Europe? What'd you say?
Well, now, what would you think at 20 years of age?
Well, I don't know. I'm
Haven't you been
asking
20
you.
at one time?
Yeah,
How do you think you would feel at 20?
yeah.
I felt absolutely comfortable to do anything I had to do, period. No qualms about it whatsoever.
Well, that's great. That's great. That's amazing.
A little more about Camp X. The time that you were there, was there any maybe undercover association with the prisoner of war camp in Bowmanville between the two? The one at Oshawa, the Lakeshore Camp X, and the prisoner of war camp in Bowmanville?
No
Was there any-
comparison.
None
None at all.
No association whatsoever?
None whatsoever. The only person that, at that time was Oshawa, General Motors.
McLaughlin.
McLaughlin? Well, he knew about the camp,
Oh.
but he was probably one of the very few that knew what was going on at Camp X. The training at Camp X were very rudimentary, practically just a sort of a beginning of your training. It got you started in the idea of what you might have to do. Your training there was not adequate. What training in England and Scotland was. But remember, by this time, we were all in the British Army. The Camp X was run by the British Army. Only one Canadian out of Toronto, I can't, his name is mentioned in my book, I can't recall it right now, but he was the only Canadian that was involved with Camp X. Everything else, every officer at Camp X was British. And a month before I got there, one of the British officers were killed while they were actively shooting, practicing.
What did you do after the war?
What did I do?
After the war, were you still in the army, or what did you?
You mean after the war and I got back safe and sound? Afterwards, I decided to go back to school. And I couldn't get into the University of Toronto because there's so many applicants I had a hard time, couldn't get into the University of Toronto, so I went to the States. So I'm an American as well. So I took engineering in the United States, Indiana to be exact. And then I came back, got married, and had 3 kids. And they're all still alive. And 2 of them are in the States, living in Asheville, North Carolina, and my one son lives in Collingwood, right here. And my family, my wife included, never knew about my wartime experiences till I started to write the book. It's something we never talked about.
Yeah, that's
Right.
No more questions? Oh, there is one more.
How did the Russians discover you in Hungary? You said you were living in the safe house with the Hungarian lady and the Germans didn't catch on. How did the Russians discover you?
Well, the Russians took over Budapest. And in the meantime, of course, the Germans were out. There's no food in Budapest. So one thing that I personally saw was they killed a horse as the Germans were retreating and the Russians were coming in. A horse was killed down the street. We could see it. Carla went down with a big butcher knife and brought back a big piece of horse meat. And that's what we lived on for a few days. She cooked at one time for both the Germans and myself and herself. She never knew that I spoke the language. Nobody knew I spoke the language, period. And that's why I was at a big advantage. She's...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. How did your family react when you told your wife and children what you had done in your past?
Sorry, I'm not sure exactly what you're...
When you started writing your book, and then your family found out that you were writing the book and that you had this past life, how did they react?
I don't know, never asked them.
Fair enough.
Any more questions? Ah. Mr. Galani?
Yes,
Did you
just
have a-
Joe.
Just Joe, okay, that's fine with me. Or should I say Mr. Gordon? You go by that anymore?
No.
Well, you know, the only thing that you and I had in common until you spoke was our age. I don't know whether that interests you or not. But now that I've heard your story, I feel I have quite a lot in common as far as memory goes. And
Good.
you have shared some incredible memories with us tonight. You know, you just said briefly a minute ago that, you know, I was never hit, but I couldn't help wondering, your life must have been in danger.
Of
at
course.
many times, but you were just not meant to,
The
you were meant
house-
to hang
The
around.
house I was in
Yes.
during the siege by the Russians, the bombs were hitting everywhere, and a couple of times the whole house shook. But
Well,
none of us, I wasn't hit,
no.
so I can't say I was hit. I may have been scared to death, but that's what
Well, I know I speak for everyone to say that we are delighted and grateful and thankful that you're still with us. And it seems to me that when we remember those during these remembrance days, that we should include those still with us. They are very few in number, but it's important for us to think of them and thank them, and you're one of those.
Thank you.
So I would like to, on behalf of this group of people who enjoyed what you've had to say, to thank you for what you did for us during the war.
I didn't do very much.